Good morning, world. It's October 8th, 2018, Columbus Day. Today's plan is to ride out to Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, and also Charlestown. This is going to be my beginner's motorcyclist capstone ride. I was always intended to do a major ride in the fall to just sort of tell myself that, yeah, you can actually ride a motorcycle, but the fact is I've done that months ago. So today is just a pleasure ride out to Harpers Ferry. I also want to see the site where John Brown was tried and executed. Believe it or not, after, 30 years, more than 30 years in this area, I've never seen that. So I'll be checking it again later. This is the pretty little town of Hillsboro, Virginia, along Route 9. Oh, there it is right there. Famous courthouse where John Brown was tried. I'm now in Charlestown, West Virginia. This is the Charlestown courthouse behind me. A large and imposing structure. And looks like a pretty cool little town, actually. This is the downtown area, the historic part. That's a pretty building across the street, isn't it? All right, interesting. Charles Washington's town. You now stand in the center of a town that is almost as old as the United States, laid out on 80 acres of the Washington lands in 1786. 4 years before the first president took office. Charles Washington, youngest of the 5 brothers of the general, spent most of his life as a successful businessman in Fredericksburg, Virginia. In the fall of 1780, 42-year-old Charles moved here, bringing his family west of the Blue Ridge and building a new log home he called Happy Retreat on lands he had inherited at the death of his half-brother Lawrence. Brother George was a frequent guest. When Charles petitioned the General Assembly of Virginia to incorporate his new town in 1786, he donated 4 lots here at the center to be available for town and county buildings. Although Charles Washington died shortly before today's Jefferson County was established, his public lots grew to be the hub for business and government for a county he accurately forecast would grow and prosper. That would be Jefferson County. This is the only known portrait of Charles Washington. You could still see his home, Happy Retreat, about 1/2 mile from here if you take the walking tour. I see a family resemblance to George Washington. While this is indeed the Jefferson County Courthouse, and it is the site of the John Brown trial, this is not the building where that action took place. This is a later building, built in the 1870s. The John Brown trial was in 1859. This is the John Brown scaffold site. Within these grounds, a short distance east of this marker, is the site of the scaffold on which John Brown, leader of the Harpers Ferry raid, was executed December the 2nd, 1859. What a pretty house. And I also like the Halloween design. There's a skeleton getting out of a well, a skeleton walking along, and another one on a bike. This is where 7 men were hanged in December 1859 and March 1860 for their part in the John Brown's raid on Harpers Ferry. The scaffold stood here in a large field. A month after the trial, John Brown was the first to die. He rode here in a wagon, sitting on his casket with his arms tied. His last message, which he gave to a jail guard, read, I, John Brown, am now quite certain that the crimes of this guilty land will never be purged away but with blood. I had, as I now think, vainly flattered myself that without very much bloodshed it might be done. 800 militiamen under Colonel John T. Gibson stood guard to prevent any attempt to free Brown. Brown's body was returned to his wife in Harpers Ferry and taken home to North Elba, New York for burial. Many Northerners regard him as a martyr. Are those Dobermans? Oh dear. Among those present at Brown's execution were Thomas J. later Stonewall Jackson, then an instructor at Virginia Military Institute, John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Abraham Lincoln in 1865, and crazy old Edmund Ruffin, who fired one of the first shots of the Civil War at Fort Sumter. On December 16th, White Raiders John Cook and Edwin Coppock and Black Raiders Shields Green and John Copeland were hanged here. John Brown's execution by Porte Crayon. Reading John Brown his death warrant. This is actually a very pleasant neighborhood. This is Jefferson Rock above Harpers Ferry, West Virginia. It is called Jefferson Rock because, reputedly, Thomas Jefferson visited here and said this view was worth a trip across the continent, or across Europe, or across the Atlantic. Frankly, I don't remember. But he said it was worth a long trip. I don't know if I agree with him. I mean, it's pretty and everything, but that's a long way to go. I've taken various friends here many times. They all have their pictures taken, clustered around this rock, as have people for many, many years. Look at all the inscriptions and sayings and initials. As my dad used to say, fools' names and fools' faces are often seen in public places. This is the beautiful St. Peter's Roman Catholic Church at Harpers Ferry. Very pretty building. The original church was built in 1830, but this is a later structure. It's here in the heights above Harpers Ferry, which keeps it from being subject to floods. which happen here quite often actually. There's an interesting story about it. During the Civil War, to protect the church from Union and Confederate shells, Father Costello flew the British Union Jack flag as a symbol of the church's neutrality. St. Peter's escaped the war relatively unscathed. Here's what it looked like in 1865. Harper House, the mansion on the hill. Here it is. From this vantage point, early residents watched Harpers Ferry grow from a tiny village into a thriving industrial community. In 1775, town founder Robert Harper chose this hillside for his home. The home was completed in 1782. Unfortunately, he died that same year and never lived here. Harper had no children and left his property to his niece, Sarah Harper Wager. On September 6, 1832, Sarah's granddaughter, Sarah Ann, married Noah H. Swain in this house. Referred to as the mansion, this house was owned by the Swain family for 89 years. This is my favorite building, the watch repair store. There's a newspaper article about how there was a watch display that turned around and around and around in the window, and it caused a real nuisance because it was so attractive and annoying. Watches, 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 watches and clocks. I find this place interesting. And I like that tall case clock. Here we are at Harpers Ferry, where this is kind of the point of the town. This is where the Shenandoah and the Potomac meet. Interesting place. That railroad trestle, that's still active. You see railroad trains going over that all the time. Now, that's Maryland Heights there. I once climbed up, I don't think you could see it, up the rocks, took a picture. Now, you see that ghost advertisement there on the rocks? I've been coming here for 34 years and I've never realized what that was until they started selling a postcard. Apparently, it says Menon's Borated Talcum Toilet Powder up there. Okay, so I bought this postcard from my friend Mike. Toilet powder. The story was the advertisement was aimed at passengers on the heavily traveled B&O Railroad. Painting advertisements on brick buildings and stone cliffs was very popular in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And of course, no trip to Harpers Ferry is complete without a visit to the John Brown Fort. This is where you hold up, let's see, October 16th, 1859. Of course, this isn't where it actually was. Where it actually was is where that obelisk is up there on the hill. Images of John Brown, 1846, 1846, 1956, 1856, 1857, 1858, 1859. I've always liked this painting. I usually park in this authorized vehicles only parking lot that I've been told is okay if you're going to the church, which is what I did. I see my bike has not been towed by the Park Service, so I'm okay. The church. I'm using engine braking here. These are actually privately owned homes. As is this. Well, it's a business. Magpie Pottery. Harpers Ferry, West by God, Virginia. Tavern. Oh, thank heaven for 7-Eleven. This is the quaint little hamlet of Waterford, Virginia, settled in 1733. Now there's a British horror film called Horror Hotel that was made in 1960. It takes place in this little pokey Massachusetts village that was plagued by witches. I like to think of Waterford as the Virginia version of Horror Hotel. There's really nothing here but this hamlet. There are no fast food places, and it's a pretty price area in which to live. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Waterford, Virginia. I once attended a wedding that took place in that church. It was a Civil War wedding. That is to say, the bride and the groom and a lot of the groomsmen were dressed in Civil War uniforms. Or was it this church? I don't remember. But it was in Waterford, that I know. Well, it's 4:22 p.m. and I put 157 miles on my bike. It's a good trip to Harpers Ferry. I always told myself that I would do a fall trip just as the capstone of my beginner biker experience. And so I have. Ah, good trip. Nice day. Pleasant ride. See you next time.